He recorded some of the most minute transactions, details of who traded how many goats for how many sheep, the day-to-day existence of life in the Hebrew city and villages. And yet, curiously, in the hundreds and hundreds of pages which he has produced, there is only one small paragraph in which he mentions the existence of a teacher known as Jesus who gave a Sermon on the Mount. What most scholars have come to a conclusion, and I promise you it does not take a tremendous amount of research or education to be able to know, that as Josephus lists problem after problem, rainstorms, earthquakes, droughts and famines, in a long list of problems encountered during that time, suddenly there is inserted a completely out of context paragraph about Jesus. The consensus of all the researchers and experts is that this paragraph was inserted at a later date. So in other words, the most prolific writer of the time does not mention Jesus at all. Is it possible that there was a vendetta? Was there revenge? Is it possible that he simply would not acknowledge either a dangerous man or someone who he simply didn't agree with? It is possible. But then we can turn to other writings. We can turn to the writings of the Essenes, some of the Hebrews themselves. We can turn to some of the writings of the Romans. And we still do not find evidence of the figure known as Jesus. And most curiously, not even in Roman records is there evidence of a crucifixion. Please do not accept my word for this. Look into these books. Do some research on your own. Take a look at Holy Blood, Holy Grail. For in fact, they have come to the same conclusion, as have many authors. There seems to be a tremendous amount of missing evidence. It simply isn't there. Though we can find archaeological evidence to support some of the passages in the Bible, though we can show that some of the events possibly occurred, but we can show where they did exist, where it happened, we cannot, with any confidence, produce evidence that Jesus existed. In the Dead Sea Scrolls, we can find the teacher of righteousness. We can find evidence that there were, in fact, individuals, possibly Essenes, who influenced greatly the time, from the Romans to the Hebrews to all of the individuals of that time. But Jesus appears to be missing. We have been working on research recently about Jesus himself, and something very astonishing surfaced. We discovered that in order for Jesus, and for the moment let us assume that he did exist, whether Jesus was a mythical identity of a teacher of righteousness, whether there was a deliberate plot to exclude Jesus from the writings of the time, let us assume for a moment that there was some sort of figure, some teacher who was influential in that time. I'm going to use the name Jesus because I believe everybody will recognize the story I am trying to present. If Jesus existed, and if he was to be a rabbi, the customs of that time demanded that Jesus be married. In fact, there are several passages which have led us to this conclusion, that in fact he did get married, that he was, as every rabbi of his time, he was betrothed. There is a passage in the Bible in which his mother Mary berates him because they are both at a wedding. She berates him because the wine has run out, and she asks him, scolds him, demands that he provide more wine. Why is this the case? In the traditions of the time, the individual who provided the wine at a wedding was the groom himself. There is very strong evidence to suggest that Jesus was very likely married to Mary Magdalene, and that in fact the two had children, that they had offspring. There are passages in the Bible that talk about the brothers and sisters of Jesus, and not in some sort of allegorical form, but in fact as if they were his true blood brothers and sisters. In her works, Jesus and the Riddle of the Dead Sea Scrolls, Barbara Thiering, through the Dead Sea Scrolls, shows that the name Mary is in fact not a name, that it is a very ancient title used in the Egyptian and several of the religions of the Middle East. The name Mary meant an individual, a woman, who belonged to one of the Essene sects. If Jesus was a teacher of righteousness, if he, as it appears in the documents shows, was a member of the Essene sect, then it is absolutely consistent with the story of the rabbis and the priestesses of the Essenes that Jesus and Mary actually united in marriage, that there was a union and it resulted in children. It appears from all of the research that several events led to the undoing of a plot to seize the throne of the Hebrew Empire, to remove the Romans and to recreate a Jewish world, a Jewish free land. Though this may sound political, it can also be described as divinely inspired. He was directed by the divinity, whatever one chooses that to be, to take the helm and to lead men into a promised world. I strongly recommend Dr. Hugh Schoenfeld's work, The Passover Plot, Holy Blood, Holy Grail, because they, as we have in our work in the Terra Papers, they have suggested, as we have, that Jesus attempted a power play, and that in fact he was undone, and an attempt to crucify him, to execute him, failed. We are suggesting, as many others have, that Jesus did not die on the cross. For a follow-up on what occurred after the crucifixion, please read Holger Kirsten, Jesus Lived in India, and the Jesus Conspiracy. What we are suggesting is that he was not dead when he was brought down from the cross, but that in fact when he was taken into the tomb, that there he was attended to, he was brought back to health and removed to a place of safety, very likely in Masada, and eventually he fled to India. There are teachings there, writings known as the Teachings of Issa, I-S-S-A. There is very, very strong evidence that Isa and Yesu were one and the same. The Quran itself denies that Jesus was crucified, that he died on the cross. The Quran suggests that he is a teacher and one deserving of respect, one who had a message to convey. But they also deny his crucifixion. What about Mary Magdalene and his offspring? There is an extraordinary work by authors Bajent Lee and Lincoln called Holy Blood, Holy Grail, in which they trace the departure of Mary and the offspring of Jesus, and how with Joseph of Arimathea they fled into the Mediterranean and arrived on the southern shores of France. It is there that they began a colony of the holy offspring of Jesus. The legend of the Holy Grail appears to have been a twisted version of the history of the family of Jesus. If in fact the Holy Family existed, they would have been known as the Sangre Real. Sangre is a word that means blood. Real obviously means royal. The Sangreal in time lost its true meaning and became known as the San, which means saintly or lordly, Graal, which was interpreted to mean a grail. The grail was a cup the holder, the vessel of the holy blood of Jesus. Our research, along with others, suggests that the Grail was simply a symbolic representation of Mary Magdalene, the vessel, the cup of the holy blood of Jesus, and that the divine offspring of Jesus survived in southern France. There are several Jewish colonies, historical records show, that Jewish colonies thrived, that there was a cult of the Black Virgin Mary, that in fact it appears that the offspring of Jesus survived, and that over the next 1,000 years they intermarried with the powerful families of Europe, that in fact they became members of some of the power players whose families exist to this day. In other words, ladies and gentlemen, it is likely that Jesus did not die on the cross. It is likely that he was married and had offspring, and that they survived and fled into southern France, where they have intermingled with the European community. The Holy Roman Church, the Vatican, discovering approximately 1,000 years later that the offspring of Jesus existed, and that they were about to return to the Holy Land, to claim the throne there, to proclaim themselves as the true descendants of Jesus, that the Holy Roman Church became terrified